Hello, everyone. We're just giving it a moment or two for folks to get settled into our virtual learning space. It's good to see you all. Happy Friday. I am delighted that you all have decided to spend this hour with us. I'm Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the founder and lead principal consultant of NWC. And we are so grateful to be able to be in community with each of you and to bring this virtual learning experience that we fondly refer to as Intentional Conversations VodCast. It's where we intersect conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging with leadership and business. As always, we have a great co-host today that I am so excited to introduce you to momentarily. But for now, please go to the chat. Let us know where you're joining the conversation from. We love to see the variety of geographies that are represented by this community. I also know that many individuals join us by LinkedIn Live. So if you have found us on LinkedIn Live and you're watching right now, I often share that we do believe the experience is optimized when you're part of the Zoom community. And so I'll invite my team now to share a link on the LinkedIn in the comment section, just in case you want to pop over here. But I am so grateful to have you all here. I also encourage you to, in the chat, if you want to share your LinkedIn information, if you're part of Zoom, that lets us know that you have a desire and interest to connect with this community beyond even this hour and window of time. And I know that there are many that would really appreciate that. Cameras today are encouraged, as always, but they certainly aren't required. We know that many just show up in the capacity of just listening in. And nonetheless, we are grateful in whatever way you are engaging with us today. We also at NWC really believe in disability inclusion. So we have the closed caption that's been enabled for those who benefit from having that available to you. So wanted to make sure that you are aware. I'm seeing that California is represented today, of course, South Carolina, which is where we're based, Ohio and Maryland and North Carolina. Great. We're so excited to see each of you. Once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations VodCast. So here we go. We're going to let the conversations begin indeed. And if you're just joining us, I am Dr. Nika White, your host of Intentional Conversations VodCast. And we are really glad to have you today to be a part of this community. We certainly anticipate that there's going to be some rich dialogue and conversations and learning. And we're always just grateful that you show up to be a part of this offering. One of the things that we like to do at the start of the hour before we jump into conversations with our guest co-hosts is just share some data with you, some information that we find appropriate for you to have on your radar. October is National Women's Small Business Month. And so as a small business, woman-owned founder, I certainly want to make sure that we're amplifying this message and we're supporting where we can business owners, women business owners in particular. And I'm a big fan of also leaning into the fact that still some disparities exist among women of color that are also in this space as business owners. And so I hope that you will find some way of providing a deepened level of support and advocacy for women of color business owners. Also, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I'm sure each of us has someone in our network, our family, our circle that has been impacted by breast cancer. And so this is a month that we set aside to be even more intentional about the screenings and the awareness through education. And so I want to certainly do my part and make sure that you all are leaning into whatever those opportunities are to help you and your loved ones to be intentional about those preventative measures related to breast cancer and how prevalent it is. Now, if you've been with us for quite some time, you know that this VodCast is not only a live opportunity as a VodCast that we bring to you weekly, but we also extract the audio every week and we make the content available in a podcast capacity. So if you are on the go a lot and that's how you like to get your content, then I want you to make sure that you spread the word and share it with others so that they know there's multiple ways to, of course, stay connected to this podcast community. So I haven't reminded you of this in a while, but today I decided to do so. You all are aware that earlier this year, I released book number 3 in partnership with Forbes Books, Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI. So want to make sure that if you haven't already gotten your copy, that you are getting your copy, that you're reading it, you're seeing it as a great resource. And I love, love, love when people write reviews. They do make a difference. And I'm so grateful for this community for supporting me so far. Now, I often give you what you can look forward to in future weeks. I'm so excited because in October, we're going to be able to welcome my friend, Dr. Ella Washington. And her book that was released about a year ago is The Necessary Journey, Making Real Progress on Equity and Inclusion. And so we're going to be talking about her book as well as the concept of workplace utopia and how to reinvigorate DEI dialogue without reinventing the wheel. So I hope you'll join us on October 20th. And as you'll see on the screen, I give you the dates for weeks to follow, as well as those key guest co-hosts who are going to be joining us. So if you don't know these names, look them up, but save the dates and help me to welcome these wonderful practitioners who I know are going to share some really useful information to this community. Now, if you happen to know of the value of the vodcast or the podcast because you've been a part of it and you want to share those testimonials with us, we will invite you to do so. And we're going to place into the chat a link that we will ask that you take a moment to just address a couple quick questions. It just lets us know that you're willing for your voice to be heard and for us to use it in some of our marketing materials as we continue to broaden and expand this audience. And so we thank you in advance. Now, for those of you who've been a part of our community, you know that I always take a moment to provide an official reading of our guest co-host bio. So today will be no different. This is our way of helping you to know how our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation, their credentials, their experience, their accolades. And so today we are welcoming Y-Vonne Hutchinson. Y-Vonne is the author of How to Talk to Your Boss About Race and the CEO of Ready Set, a diversity and inclusion product and services firm that helps tech giants, political leaders, media outlets, and Fortune 500 companies speak more productively about racism, in turn, talk into action. To date, Ready Set has worked with hundreds of companies around the world to build, manage, and grow diverse teams. In a former life, prior to founding Ready Set, Y-Vonne worked as an international labor and human rights lawyer for nearly a decade. So if you've been a part of this community, you know what to do. As I stop sharing my screen, I want you to find those reactions, those emojis, whatever accolades and words of affirmation that feels appropriate, and help me to welcome, as I add to the spotlight, our guest co-host today, Y-Vonne Hutchinson. Y-Vonne, we're so grateful to have you here today. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I know that it's super early for you on the West Coast, so we don't take that lightly at all. And before I yield and give you an opportunity to greet this audience in your own way, one of the things that we often like to ask our guest co-hosts to share with our community is maybe something we wouldn't know about you from reading your bio, as I just did, or even from maybe looking at your LinkedIn profile. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit with that question, but we're so grateful that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's just such a blessing to start the day off in this way with you all in community, talking about the things that we're all passionate about. So thank you for having me, Dr. White. And also, I just love saying doctor before a sister's name. So I'm just feeling so blessed that I get to do that this morning. Fun fact, I always struggle with this because I try not to be boring, but my fun facts typically are. So my boring fun fact is lately I've been drawing on my inner Oprah, who I don't know if you know, she has a farm and whatever. And I just love to like be in my garden. I am obsessed with gardening and making recipes in the garden and having vegetables, and then having my child help. She loves to water the plants. So that's my kind of boring fun fact.
I love it though. I think that's such a way to kind of unify with family members. You talked about how, your daughter kind of waters the garden. But I also would imagine that it's probably a part of maybe your self-care routine, right? I mean, when we're one with nature, sometimes that can really help, center us and ground us. And so anyway, I love that was your fun fact. And so thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. And one thing I'll add to that, I think it's also a way to connect with my ancestors. My grandfather was a sharecropper. He farmed watermelon. And so my mother always freaks out. Like, I try to take y'all out the country and now you going back. And I love that connection. Yeah.
No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So before we jump in, there's so much that I want to talk about today. And one of the things that I know this entire community is holding in mind, along with so many others, is just the suffering and the pain and the violence that we all have been exposed to over this past week or so. And I feel that it would be irresponsible if we didn't take a moment to just acknowledge that. And I want to ask how first and foremost are you doing, Y-Vonne? How are you processing?
You know, I don't have friends and family in Israel, but I do have people close to me, Israel and Gaza. I do have people close to me who are personally affected. And I think, as with many of us, it's been a really hard week. As you said at the top, my background is in international human rights law. What's not there is that I do have a background in counterterrorism and human rights as well. And, I went into that work, and the work that I'm doing today, in part because I just really believe in justice, the power of justice, and the need for everyone to be able to live free from violence and to determine their own destiny. And I have been, and I will own this, more quiet than I usually am around these topics. And I think a lot of people have.
Yeah, as well.
Yeah, because we are learning, yes, but I think it's also really scary, the idea that we might say the wrong thing. And I look back on BLM and what we said in 2020, which is like, sometimes you just need to speak up. It might not be the right thing, but staying quiet also says something. So I've been trying to acknowledge that my point of view may not be perfect, and also create space for the very real pain that people around me are feeling. I think that in the conversations I've seen so far, a lot of people are litigating pain, and I stand where I stand politically, and we can have a conversation about that and about terrorism and about human rights all day. But where I stand now as a person and a human being is really trying to figure out how I can be there to support my friends, the people in my company, the people who we are working with, who are in severe shock and pain, deep-seated pain, as they see what's happening over there, and use my voice to advocate for peace immediately, because regardless of what you believe, this is happening right now. This escalation of violence is terrifying.
Yes.
And push for addressing some of the root causes of this event, because it didn't happen in a vacuum. So that's where my mind and my heart go. I'm listening, I'm learning, I'm growing. I personally have been in heated discussions at home with my husband and at work. And, I'm surrounded by people who are DEI experts and who know this stuff, and we can't all agree. So I can't imagine what it's like for folks who are struggling in their workplaces. So yeah, I mean, that's where I am, trying to give people the tools to have these conversations with compassion, and really focusing on what I can do, not just to talk about it, but to be about it. You know what I mean? And to make sure that I'm using my voice to try to end, or push for the end for this conflict.
Yeah, to get us to a place of peace. I so appreciate everything that you just shared. I appreciate the rawness in the moment, nature of how you are sharing, how you're processing. And I think that what it does is probably giving a lot of the rest of us who are listening, who will be exposed to this after, the live show is completed, to give ourselves permission to do the same, to not feel like we have to rush to create and curate some type of perfect response. We are imperfect people, and this is complex on so many imaginable levels. It's so nuanced, and it's evolving every single day. And I think that what makes it for me a bit unsettling is that as a practitioner in this space, and Y-Vonne, I'm sure you probably have experienced this as well because you alluded to it, that we are also supporting clients who are needing some answers for how to show up in their workplace, and how do they message positioning, whatever it is, what should the positioning be, and how to really demonstrate a deep level of empathy and compassion while, doing our best to not create harm to others who may have different perspectives. So it is complex at every imaginable level. And I'm grateful to hear you say and endorse the fact that while they're tools that people need, we are not, as practitioners, immune to the emotions that we carry and we hold as well when we're exposed to these things. And I just don't want that to fall on us as being missed, because I know a lot of people that join this community week in and week out are champions and advocates of the work of inclusion and equity, and ending oppression and injustice. And so if you're feeling that way, I just want you all to maybe find some level of comfort in what Y-Vonne has shared, and also what I am sharing as an admittance to this is hard. This is hard. At the bare minimum, this is hard, right?
Yeah,
Anyway.
I mean, this is hard. And I think that it's hard, but I feel like this is what we're supposed to do. I think
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna stir a hornet's nest. Sometimes I like to kick the hornet's nest. I think that, if we are DEI practitioners, if we are committed to doing this work, we can't just do it when it's easy, and
Right.
we can't just do it when it's straightforward, and we have to do it when it's hard. And our job in this day and age, which is an age of chaos, let's be
Yes.
clear, economic, social, political, environmental chaos, our job is to support people and help organizations support people through that chaos. And we don't really get to opt out of that.
Right.
We can
Well
think
said.
deeply. Yes, we can make sure we're taking thoughtful approaches. But, what I keep coming back to, because, there are people who've told me to be quiet and to stay silent and to not say the wrong thing. And I can't help but think about the people who told me the same thing when it was Black bodies on the line,
Right.
2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
I think that for me, holding with grace that it is not straightforward, and we need to pause and think, and we need to be thoughtful and deliberate and cheerful and kind. If we don't meet this moment, I think that a lot of the criticisms that people have about DEI and what it's meant to do and who we really are feel a lot more salient to me. The criticisms that I've been fighting, at least, right? Like,
Yeah.
the idea that it's just surface, that it's just feel good, woo woo,
Yeah.
that, and so I am in the process, transparently, of challenging myself, because I'm not challenging. I mean, I'm saying what I think. This is too delicate of a time to be like, I challenge you. No, you're on your journey. But I'm in the process of challenging myself to really figure out, like, what is my moral obligation? What is my professional obligation? And how do I make sure I meet this moment in a way that I don't regret? Just ethically.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think that that's a challenge that, many of us could place on ourselves, right? However in which we are navigating and processing, what does this mean for us? How do we want to show up in this moment? And so thank you for the time and space for us just to go there for a moment. I do think that it was important. And I hope that those who are part of this community found what's been shared helpful and useful to, as you are thinking about your next steps and how you want to navigate. So I want to talk, Y-Vonne, about your book, How to Talk to Your Boss About Race and CEO. No, about race. I was looking at your bio, and the next line was CEO of Ready Set. But how to talk to your boss about race. Can you give us maybe the background of what was the
Yeah.
genesis that led to that being the topic of your book?
Yeah, I mean, I just brought up 2020, and that's when I was approached to write the book. Um, June, July 2020, the summer of 2020, when we saw the death of George
Yeah.
Floyd and protests around the country. I was in my ninth month of pregnancy. And I remember I was on bed rest. I tell this story because it is the story of, I feel like, those of us who are in this fight for justice and equity. In my pregnancy, I was so big that my pelvis had started to separate. And I remember at the time I lived in a house that was it was a tiny old house, and it had like these creaky,
Mm.
windy stairs to get to the bedrooms. And every day I would lumber up the stairs in pain. And finally my doctor said, "You've got to go on bed rest." And I said, "Yes, I do. I will."
Yes.
Um, and I will never forget this moment, Dr. White, where I literally laid down my head on my pillow, my cool pillow. And I'm just finally in this moment of rest and growing this baby. And the phone starts to ring. It starts to ring,
Mm.
ring, and ring, and ring. And it says, the call say, "Get up. And you got to write this book. And now's the moment." And, I wrote the book in part because of that, because I felt like at that moment, people were in a place to listen. And what the book is really about, it's sort of about how do people as individual employees leverage their power to
Mm.
make systemic change. So often I'm approached by people who say, "Look, I really want to change this culture, but I'm like just one person,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yes, ostensibly the book is about the conversation, but so much of the book is about the lead up to getting in that room and thinking
Mm.
about how do you work within your companies? How do you find your allies? How do you figure out who you're supposed to be talking to? How do you advocate for yourself and others strategically so that once you're in the room in that difficult conversation, you're in the place where you're best positioned to make systemic
Yeah.
change? That's what the book
Yeah.
is
Yeah, no, I love that. And we're going to actually place into the chat on how people can get your book. Again, and that title is How to Talk to Your Boss About Race. So then let's talk about Ready Set. Give us a little bit of history as to what led you to wanting to start your own consultancy and how you went about identifying these specific service offerings or products, given your history of, international labor and human rights law.
Yeah, sometimes I wish I could just have a Zoom screen full of DEI consultants to hear everybody tell their stories. I'm
Yeah,
sure there would
wouldn't that
be.
be great? I know this question that usually finds its way into these conversations every Friday because I'm always so intrigued. I often say that DEI kind of found me, but not really. But anyway, those stories are always really interesting. So we love to hear yours, Y-Vonne.
Yeah, well, okay. There's the what I call official story and then the unofficial story. So
Okay.
the official story was my last role. I was working as an international labor rights lawyer working with sugarcane workers in Nicaragua who were dying of occupational disease. And
Mm.
after spending a career working in war zones, conflict zones, refugee camps, that was the first time I really confronted the power of structural everyday violence.
Yeah.
Right now, I think about what for the rest of the world was the cost of peace. In that situation, I thought, what was the acceptable cost for this Nicaraguan economy? And that cost was the deaths of sugarcane workers in incredibly high amounts and large numbers. And
Mm.
I tell the story about the company towns, the plantations where I worked, where you could not find a place to get lunch,
Yeah.
in 1 o'clock, but there were 24-hour coffin stores, and they were expanding the cemeteries faster, not as fast as they could fill them. And the death, the violence was generational. So you would have men and women who would go out into the sugarcane fields and get sick in their 30s and 40s, and then their children would go out into the fields when they were child laborers around 14, 15 against the law, and work in the fields, and they would get sick when they were 18 or 19, and then they would die, leaving behind infants, and you just saw the decimation and the decimation of these communities. And that really kind of made me think about the power that work had over people's lives, and how it could be a place of opportunity and also a place of harm, and how much we sacrifice often for ourselves, our family, our progress in the workplace, when we can be experiencing some very detrimental things. And, it may not be as stark as death in a sugarcane field, although we do see occupational occupational safety hazards like that in the United States. I'm reminded of the Texas workers who were dying of heat exposure this summer. But we do also see quite a few people who are experiencing that harm. And so I said, in 2015, when I started this company, you kind of had the Googleification of workplace culture. Everybody wanted to be like Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was also a very racist and exclusive place at that time, and suffering kind of under these delusions of utopian equity, et cetera. And so for me, it was really kind of a question of, how do I change this particular niche so that what they're doing and the harms that we're seeing already don't ripple out to the rest of the country and other workplace cultures around the globe. So started in Silicon Valley, and slowly we've started to branch out. And today we work with media, government organizations, nonprofits, institutions of higher ed, healthcare institutions, et cetera. That's the public story. Now you'll hear that all day. You'll hear a little bit about the private story in my book.
Well, I was going to say, where I'm going next then.
Private story is the one that we all share, which is, I was in a toxic work environment. And while I was fighting for the rights of others in various contexts, I was at the same time experiencing racism, sexism, violent toxicity, just really awful, traumatic stuff that no one should have to experience at work. And I said, I have to take back my power. I can't let this happen to me again. I have to do what I can so this doesn't happen to anybody else. And nobody's talking about it. And I had to do so much work to figure out, girl, this is happening to you because you're a Black woman in the work. Like, we weren't having those conversations back then,
right.
And like, today it's out in the open. Like, you can find communities where we all have somebody who's touching our hair and criticizing our work and telling us to smile and not promoting us for some strange reason that doesn't exist in fact, right? Like, we all have, but back then, I had to get to that myself and dig for that and validation. And I was like, I don't want anybody else to have to do that. So that's why I started writing. Sorry, that was very long-winded.
No, but it was a story that needed to be shared, because it's one that I hear very commonly on this show. So many women that have started their own companies. It was for that very reason. They were looking for something different that they could not find because they felt it did not exist the way that it needed to. So I'm going to go and create it on my own. I am big on words and language. And there was a statement that you made that I took notice of, and it is that power that work has over people. And I don't know if we really take the time to sit back and think about just how powerful work is over us. I mean, we live in a capitalistic society, and I think that it has grown in its intensity in terms of how in which people try to capitalize on capitalism, right? And it becomes really challenging. And I have recently heard someone, actually a young professional that I admire greatly, so we were just kind of chatting. She said, is it even possible to believe that we can escape what so many experience, especially marginalized professionals, as it relates to this heavy weight of a burden of the power of work? And while she didn't use those words, because those words were, again, just introduced in this conversation, I couldn't help but to think about that. And so Y-Vonne, when you find yourself maybe in conversations with young professionals or even seasoned professionals who really are trying to navigate the waters around how prevalent of a scenario it is for people to find themselves in workplaces like you described, and the power that that has over their being, right, and their existence. What do you say to that? I mean, can we overcome this?
Um, I'm trying not to be glib. It's, because I do feel like it's like, can we overcome capitalism? I think that it's, I think we're seeing movement. So let me start from the optimistic place. I think the collective organizing that we're seeing, the age of the union that we're seeing right now, is really powerful, because I do think that in a lot of ways people are taking back their collective power. And perhaps, in my book, I talk about power quite a bit. The kind of power that you as an individual have and the kind of power that exists. We're so used to thinking about power as sort of binary. You either have it or you don't. And I
Right.
in reality, it's multifaceted. We all have different kinds of power. In my book, I talk about social power, the power to influence people and change actions, right? And there are ways in which each of us can access this power. But I also feel like this power has to be situated in the broader context of the economic power and the coercive power of these workplaces and employers in our economy. And I think as we think about rising inequality, as we sort of see the balance of power shift in some ways back to these economies because of the current labor market and the push to make it worse, and as we think about deliberate policy choices that tie a lot of our outcomes, not just our financial outcomes, but for example, our healthcare outcomes in a pandemic, to our employment. I don't think it's possible to underestimate the coercive power that the workplace has. Even some simple decisions of, do I go to work sick today, can have huge ramifications. Do I hide my disability, right? And then the ones that we're so used to thinking about, like, how do I speak out on behalf of myself if I'm being targeted? Do I talk about the person that I love? Do I identify with my true gender? Like, these are all issues that we face in the workplace. And and I think that become really, really hard for us to navigate with those powers. And I don't know how to escape that. I'll just tell you my personal story, and then we can, I'd be interested to hear from you. But like, part of starting the company, starting that Ready Set, was trying to do that escape. Like, I don't want to be beholden to, and in my case, I'm not saying this is everybody's case, but in my case, I had a white male boss who was prone to outbursts, profanity, horrible manipulation. I did not want to be vulnerable to that and feel the coercive power of that kind of workplace over my life. Now that I have a company, and I'm never going to do the woe is me, I'm CEO kind of thing. I have a lot of power. I have to sit with that, and I have power over others. And every day I have to think about, how do I not become the thing that I was taught to be in the workplace, right? But there are still people who have power over me. Going back to the beginning of this conversation, and the conversation around fear, around how we talk about Israel and Palestine and the current conflict, a lot of the reason that people are silent, DEI practitioners, consultants included, is because they're afraid of losing clients. They're afraid of being blackballed. They're afraid of, being, targeted on social media. And all of these, is particularly as Black and Brown practitioners, are spaces in which other people can have power over us. So I don't think we ever truly escape this paradigm. I think it's incumbent upon us to try to change it, and that's easier said than done. I know that's like change capitalism. Okay, I'll get right on it. You know what I mean? Great.
Yeah.
I do think as we think about collective organizing and how the balance of the success stories that I started with, of how workers are successfully advocating for themselves, that is what we need to hold on to as we try to imagine how do we curtail and contain the kind of power that you're talking about.
I think that's so good, Y-Vonne. And what's coming up for me is, you talked about how multifaceted power is. I think that we as a society, we need to get a bit more sophisticated in how in which we are defining power, how in which we are recognizing power, and reimagining it. And so, one of my good friends, Deb Sofield, she often says that, and she makes this comment more so around women, which I can understand why, but she says that part of the problem with how women are not able to really align with the power that they have is because they think that they have none, right? And so I love how what you brought to the conversation is we need to really reassess and evaluate where our power exists, because we do have it. All of us have it in some shape, form, or fashion. And I think that that's the starting point for being able to openly leverage it and use it to our benefit of creating social change that we want to see. So thank you for highlighting that. When we spoke about your book, we talked about kind of the genesis of how it came to be, but the topic is how to talk to your boss about race. And so whether it's a boss, whether it's a coworker, whether it's, a friend or whoever, those conversations can always be very delicate, right? They can be uneasy for people. And so I would love for you to share just some practical, maybe best practices for individuals who are looking to engage in meaningful conversations about race or equity and diversity and justice and all of these topics that can feel really complex at times.
Yeah. So I'm going to try not to, I'm going to like try pick and choose because,
I'm sure there's many.
But yes. The first thing I talk about in the book is understanding yourself. I think in any conversation where you're trying to move another person, you need to understand how you show up to that conversation. So I open the book unpacking my identity and then trying to give people the tools to unpack theirs. So, talking about my social identity as, yes, a Black woman, to build on that, a Black queer woman, but also a Black queer woman who's married to a man, a Black queer woman who comes from a certain socioeconomic background, a Black queer woman who went to an Ivy League law school, a Black, so like these layers, all of these are aspects of my identity. They might not, I might not feel like you get to the core of me by naming those things, but when I walk into a conversation, that identity walks in with me, right? Yes. And that it confers benefits and it also confers disadvantages. It also informs my perspective on the conversation and whose voice I'm elevating and whose voices and perspectives I may be missing, right? So if I'm talking to my boss about race, it may be really straightforward and easy for me to talk about the Black experience in America, right? Because it's the experience that I live, it's the experience that's at the forefront. It may be less easy for me to talk about the Latino, Latinx, Hispanic experience in the US, the immigrant experience in the US, the Asian experience in the US, or intersectional experiences in the US based on race, like what a person who is a transgender person of color may feel at any particular moment. But all of those perspectives are important to understand and acknowledge. Understanding, like, we're not going to be experts as we walk into these conversations, right? As we have these discussions. And I think it's also important because you need to know how you're being perceived, right? Like, we don't walk into these conversations with a blank slate. And I really push for people to think strategically. And to think strategically, it's really important that you're honest with yourself about how that other person is perceiving you. And I'll give you an example. When I started Ready Set, I remember one of our first big clients was a company that wanted to do some executive work, and then they wanted to do some assessments, but they wanted to get to know the team first, which I think is a lot of people do. That's fine.
Yeah, that's
We
pretty
kind
common.
Yeah, we went into their offices to meet them. And I remember having conversations. I'm gonna say they're just lovely, lovely people. I think this shows how at the beginning of their journey they were. You know, I went in that room thinking, okay, you know, the questions are gonna come to me. I gotta be super prepared. Let me be on my P's and Q's. Let me show them a Black woman at work. And then all of the questions went to my white female colleague or my Black male colleague. Nobody addressed me in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, as the CEO, I was like, wow, as the CEO, I had to like think, and I was like, you know, I could in this moment come out guns blazing a little bit, but that's not going to get me what I want. I'm working with my team to move these people as a team, and where they are right now, they're listening to him and they're listening to her. All right. And I know that she and him they're on message with me because we're all working together. Right. So let them do what they do. Let us debrief in the back about what just happened. And then let what just happened inform our strategy. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's not to excuse it or erase the harm that happens there. But, you know, it taught me that I may come into every room in my mind as the CEO, but in the other person's mind, that may not be the case, right? So understanding how that my identity, my positioning, my power impacts my message is really important. That's the first thing I'll say. And you can tell these are long-winded, so I'm just going to tell you one more thing. The second thing that I advocate for is do not do this alone. You know, I think I talk a lot about how we're the great disservice our historical education is to us. And maybe even more so now as we're seeing the attacks on it. And it's really, you know, it affects us, right? And you know, I was taught about the great men and women, singular, of history, right? I was taught about Rosa Parks on the bus. I was not taught about SNCC. I was not taught about all the collective organizing that happened in the back. I was not taught about the woman that came before Rosa Parks. I was not taught about the Alabama bus boycott. You know, I was taught about that one person. I was taught about Martin Luther King. I was taught about singular individuals that through the sheer force of will changed the system. And that change does not happen that way. Never has. I don't think it ever will. Yes, there are a few dynamic individuals that people rally around as leaders, but understand that that is a rally and that is a collective force. You as a singular person, you have to be really careful, especially if you're a person of color, especially if you're a woman, especially if you are a woman of color, if you have a disability, if you hold a marginalized identity and you go into this work alone, you can put, and in all likelihood, you will put a target on your back. So, so understanding what is my community at work saying? Who are my people? Who are the people who are already doing this that I can learn from? Who are the people who share my perspective? Who am I walking to the room with when I walk into the room is really important. And how do I get aligned with them first? Right? How do I understand what they're doing? How do I understand how my voice is part of a shared collective goal? And how do I make sure that should something go down, I have allies and protection in the workplace that I'm in? We don't do this alone. And I think that we put a lot of on ourselves, and we put ourselves at risk when we try to. So that's my second piece of advice. Don't go at it alone. And then I have like advice for the actual conversation.
You have to get the book to get all the others.
Gotta get the book, but that's the prep work, right?
Yes, absolutely. No, but the two that you shared is really impactful. I love the idea of this collective force. And I truly believe that too. I don't think that no one gets to where they are and to accomplish something of significance that has such, you know, that produces such social change on their own. I think that we all are banding together to help create those experiences. And, you know, it's a small example, but it's one of the reasons that this vodcast, you know, we're entering into our 4th year, is so important for us. It's because, you know, I bring people on every single week because I'm constantly learning. My team is constantly learning. And I think that, you know, all of the practitioners that are in this space, we all have very specific ways in which we're navigating the complexity of this work. And we need for the voices of all those individuals to be able to have platforms to share. So I think that collective force is something that we all can walk away with. So I'm going to open it up to this audience. I don't want to keep hogging Y-Vonne for myself, although I have many other questions, but I can hold them. And so I want to give you a chance. If you're holding some curiosities or you want to contribute to the conversation with some comments or maybe a question, then I want to invite you to submit that. If you're part of our Zoom community, then you can do that by using the raise hand feature. And that lets me know that you're willing for me to invite you to the spotlight and to have you unmute yourself and share. Or if you're just here and maybe you want to present your question into the chat, you can do so. If you're on LinkedIn Live, go to the comment section, add your questions. My team is watching that carefully and bringing that over into our discussion here. And so let's see, I'm looking at the chat because I do believe that we have a question that has come up already. So let me see what this is. Okay, this is from Michael on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn, Michael. How do you both keep yourselves positive and resilient in these times of chaos? Y-Vonne, I want you to take that. We know gardening, right?
we know gardening. I probably need to get back into therapy. I always advocate it for people. I actually have and this is not to tie everything back in the book, but I do have a chapter in the book that just acknowledges self-care and taking time. I think that that's part of it. You know what I've been doing a lot. I've been just hearing so much research around isolation and how important friendships are to having a happy, healthy life. So I've really been reinvesting in my friendships, meeting friends, just going out for dinner, meeting folks, having like a key. Like I think when the world is really trash, those conversations are super important. And like, this is gonna sound, listen, I'm an elder millennial, so I'm right on the cusp. And I remember the old days and having a phone call. I love like being on the phone, you may not always be there in person, but like my mom has this thing every Sunday. I don't know about your parents. My mom will do this. She will be on the phone for hours. She'll just be like, I'm talking to my girlfriend. I'm talking to Miss So-and-so, and I'm like, like so much time about. And the phone just rings. It just rings until Sunday is done. And I'm kind of in that place too, where I'm like, I just like picking up the phone and just chit-chatting and having a gap. So those are that's the big one is the friendship, the group, the phone calls and the special one-on-one time.
I love that. I love that you don't sacrifice friendships, even as busy as your schedule is. I think that's really important. So mine are a little different. I don't like talking on the phone at all. My conversations are usually like really, really short, right? But you mentioned therapy, and yes, I do strongly believe in talk therapy. I think that it has really provided great grounding for me in many moments of my life. And again, one of the things I talk about when I share therapy is something that I am an advocate for, is that it's not just when you're feeling stressed, right? And you need all this support. It's even when you're feeling healthy and you just want to have that outlet. I mean, so I think that's something to share as well. I love being in community with others. There's a number of small groups that I constantly kind of, stay connected with. And I think that helps keep me centered and grounded as well, especially in the chaos. How are you navigating? How are you processing? Well, what are you seeing? I mean, just, those thought partners can be really, really useful. I work out. That really keeps the stress, at minimum. And I think that's important. Our physical health has a lot to do with our mental health as well. And so, I'm a woman of faith, and so prayer is always something that finds its way into helping me to deal with chaos, especially when we can't control things that are out of our control. And then the last one is really about taking clarity breaks, where I can really put in perspective what feels insurmountable in a moment and then be able to relegate it to, it's really just this much of an issue for me. And so that level of gratitude, I think, also helps to calm me when the storm is like raging. And so anyway, great question, Michael. Thanks so much. Pavana, who's actually part of our community, it's good to see you. Shared that I just started working with a therapist a month or so ago, and it's helpful in many ways. And so, yes, I do agree. Okay, so I'm not seeing any hands up. Let me just ask the question again before I go to my next question. Okay, no hands. Okay, so I want to ask you about New Day. This is something that you reference a good bit, and I want you to elaborate on what New Day is and how it contributes to promoting diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Tell us about New Day.
Yeah, I think so. With Ready Set, one of our big things is around growth. I feel like
Mhm.
growth is huge. Like, I think everybody in their jobs wants to grow. And I know
Yeah,
inside of our company, the biggest questions we get are around, what are my growth opportunities?
yeah,
And
yeah.
how can I learn? And, as a service provider, I'm sure you know this, there's only so much of you that can go around. And we built New Day as a platform for professional skills development and
Mhm.
growth, particularly around the areas that relate to DEI, but it feels in some ways like you say DEI and people automatically go to like
Yeah,
representation. And
yeah.
I think it's broader than that. It's like, it's
Mm,
how you think about building a great set of inclusive best practices, really refined skills that help you show up at work better, like better for you and better for the people around you.
okay.
And I named it New Day because it's like every day is like a new opportunity for us to learn and do better. We have this sort of fixed mindset around
Mhm.
who we are as people, but we're constantly evolving, constantly changing. And I think we're best when we're hungry for new information and we're curious. So,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
named New Day with that in mind. Like this is a platform that you can go to when you're curious. And it's not just Ready Set content. We very really, really focused on making sure our content was just like very dope, like just very, very, very good.
Yeah.
And we have some entertainment folks in our midst, and we really believe in high quality content. And we also know that learning this stuff can feel like a slog, and that's like this is the last thing I want to feel like a slog for you. So we
Yeah,
really
right.
focused on that, but we also are bringing in other voices from our partners and people who we really love and respect in the ecosystem that we think that can
Mm,
be additive, because we're not experts on
yeah,
everything. Our goal is
yeah,
just to kind of get you to where you want to go in terms of that progress, and meet you where you're at. So it's micro learning, it's live
yeah.
learning, it's community-based learning, all around the sort of premise of like, how can I be a little bit better for myself and for others tomorrow?
I love that. And so New Day is not just for your internal colleagues, it's something that you make available to your partners that you are in relationships with as well. I love that. What a great tool. Okay, so I'm going to try to sneak in another question. This question is coming from someone from our LinkedIn Live audience. Provided that work does have a level of power over us, how should we address a supervisor or CEO regarding race without worrying about the kickback that may follow? And I'm
Yeah.
assuming the kickback is maybe the repercussions that a lot of people obviously have some concerns over. Yeah.
Yeah. And those are very valid concerns. A lot of the
Yeah.
EEOC complaints that we see are retaliation complaints. And they
Yeah.
do have a huge percentage of those reports. I Not to belabor the point, but I think that is why community is so important. And that's why I say, you know, don't walk into that conversation alone. I think I recommend a tool in my book called like power mapping, and
Hmm.
also mapping your allies and seeing before you have that conversation who at work may feel the same way you do. And maybe it's a formal
Yeah.
organization, maybe it's your ERG. And let me just say, this is a very intentional question, because there will be people at work who say they feel like you, who may not feel like you. So you have to be really
That's true.
careful who you're
Good point.
engaging with, right? So uh is it a group like an ERG, a DEI committee, et cetera? Is it other individuals who just sort of spoken about the same thing? If you're not sure, take some time to get to know your colleagues, which I recognize is harder in the Zoom era, but still possible, and figure out where they stand.
Mm,
Only when you have what you feel like is that safety, that backing, that support, well, then I think about how you approach your boss, right? And I
right.
think like, it's not as simple as like, let me just put some time on their calendar and walk in, right? I think that there are strategies to how you have this conversation? Do you link it to a particular incident? Do you speak to someone who may have more influence over your boss, who's not your boss, but who's also your friend and may be better positioned to have this conversation? Do you sort of say, okay, I am really, really tight with my boss. I know they'll take this really well. How do I do this? And then when you get into the conversation, this is what I did not touch on. I think it's so important that we go in intentionally. One of the things that I do, and I think in some ways we did in this conversation here, is I try to share my areas of growth. So I think there's a sort of misperception that DEI professionals, DEI advocates come in and they know it all. I say it's misperception because it's not true in my experience. But what I like to do is typically disarm that by saying, like, look, like, here's where like I have had to grow. This is what I got wrong. If I'm in a conversation, I focus on an action and then I link it back to like, area of growth that I may have had. So for me, one of my huge areas of growth has been around transgender visibility and making sure transgender folks feel seen and heard and empowered, and also the different ways in which transgender marginalization of transgender people happens, and my own internalized biases and my own taught marginalizations around transgender inclusion, right? That has been a huge growth area for me, and it's been motivated by personal factors as well as just the pain that I've seen amongst transgender people who I love dearly because of mistakes that people have made. And I've had to really do that work. I share that when I'm talking about how we can grow around areas of racism and bias, because I've had to do it myself, and quite often that can help disarm a person. I also, like I said, focus on the action. I try to be very present in the conversation, and leave space for the person to talk. I also recognize that true change does not happen within a conversation. It's like not just a conversation.
Right.
It's likely a series of conversations.
Yes.
This is something you're going to have to check back with. You're going to have to follow up on. You're going to have to be support around. And, that's again why you want the community around you, because like, in essence, what you are kind of agreeing to do, or you might be putting yourself into, is a situation where you're taking somebody on a journey. And I think that resentment gets created when you say, okay, like this isn't, and I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm not judging how this happens. I'm just saying it happens. Yeah. Is that like, you say like, I saw you do this racist action. I'm calling out the harm. I'm calling on you to be different. And then I'm taking a step back. And I think quite often what is needed in addition to all of those call outs or call-ins or however you want to do it is then, I know this is hard. I know this is not easy. Here's my journey. I'm happy to continue to talk to you about this. I don't want you to see this as a threat. And I know it's like really volatile. Like people are like, why do I have to make this person who has this power, the power of whiteness, the power of the institution, why do I have to make them feel comfortable when I don't have the power in that situation? And I get it, right? But like what you're trying to do right now is to bring them along, right? And that's why this work is so taxing, is because each day we're doing that delicate dance. We're taking those hits. We're walking with and doing the sacrifice to walk with people who have institutional power over us and have harmed us to get them to this better place. And that like takes a toll. But in this conversation, that may be what happens. So I hope that I've answered your question around this. It's really complicated. I try to do a better job of it in the book. But I think those are some things that I think about as I think about protecting oneself from harm. And then the last thing I'll say is that be for real with yourself around whether you're the person to have this conversation. Because I talk about this, but like it may not be you, right? Like, and you need to you come first, your well-being, yourself, your needs come. The whole reason that you're calling out this behavior likely is because it impacts you. And so also thinking about the other things that can impact you in a very in a very clear and honest way is really important. And if it's not you, can it be somebody else? And if it can be
Yeah.
somebody else, is this the right environment for you? Right?
Mhm.
How do you
Yeah.
survive this environment? Or how do you go to an environment that may better serve you?
Yeah. Lots of things to consider when you're really trying to be strategic and to produce a scenario whereby the outcome you're seeking can certainly be in reach. And so we're so appreciative, Y-Vonne. Thanks so much for sharing. Get the book again to this community, How to Talk to Your Boss About Race and Power Mapping. I'm so intrigued now. I definitely have plans to get your book and would love to be in conversation with you in the future about it at some point. But we're grateful that you've spent this time with us. We know that it's early for you on the West Coast, but we are so grateful. And we did share your LinkedIn information into the chat. And so for those of you who wish to stay connected to Y-Vonne and her content and learn more about Ready Set, then make sure you check her out. Wishing everyone a safe, healthy, and happy weekend. And we'll hopefully see you back here next Friday for Intentional Conversations VodCast. Bye-bye.